I felt was this restful sleep after having that session. And I think that's really important as we think about like how important sleep is. There's a lot of work out there that just shows like sleep is important for just being alert and, for memory and all those kinds of things. But the chronic lack of sleep that we are getting in this society as we're kind of getting poor sleep or not good sleep, that has implications for our brain health long term. And so I think if we want to continue to live happy, healthy, full lives, understanding how we can slow our bodies down and actually have good, restful sleeps that give us the potential to be 100% of who we are every single day, this is critical, I think, to brain health and physical well-being as anything. So I think the importance of like helping slow that body and like slow your mind, I think is just really important.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unmasked with Simran. I'm your host, and today I am very excited to welcome a special guest, Dr. Rupal Patel, to this podcast. Rupal is one of the most well-known speech scientists in the world. She's a tenured professor at Northeastern. She's the founder of Voice of Women Lab, of an amazing voice AI company called VocaliD, which she then sold to Veritone. She's been named one of the most creative people in business by Fast Company. She's a TED speaker. But more than that, she's one of the most exceptional human beings that I have gotten to meet on this journey of building Tattva. And what I love about her that she's been able to bridge the gap between science and soul. So welcome, Rupal.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Simran. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
Likewise. Before we get started, Rupal, I love to do a quick ritual. Let's take a breath together within our heart and let's activate our heart for a heartfelt conversation. So I invite you to breathe with me. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, today's episode isn't just about tech. For me, it's more about what it means to unmask your voice, to be truly heard, to be giving voices to people that didn't have one. That's what really resonates about your story, and to enable people to reclaim parts of themselves that they may have lost, that they may have silenced. So I'd love to start, Rupal, with a little bit about this concept of voice AI and what inspired and intrigued you to get into it.
Yeah, thanks, Simran. So I initially started my career journey as a speech language pathologist, and I worked with people with very severe speech disorders. And then I got really interested in technology and whether technologies could be used to augment or help them communicate. Sort of speed up many years later, and we had this idea in the lab that we could actually create unique sounding voices for people who had to rely on devices to communicate. So think about someone like Stephen Hawking, or a child on the autism spectrum, or a child who has to use with cerebral palsy, who has to use a device from birth, right? And so these are computer devices where you type in a message or somehow select a message, sometimes even with your eyes. People are so humans are so wired to communicate. And when we can't with our natural apparatus, we find new ways to communicate, right? So there's these electronic devices, there's a whole cottage industry of them, but the voice that comes out of them in terms of the synthetic voice that is produced as kind of like the message to be said, out loud, was typically a very generic sounding robotic voice. The work that happened in my lab and then later as this company VocaliD was all about trying to figure out, can we make a unique voice for each individual? Because some of my early work in my PhD and early in my career was all about seeing what was left over, even in someone who can't speak very clearly. Can they still make some sounds that could be utilized by machines to like create a unique voice for them? So that's where the idea came from. And then I think it kind of became a much bigger idea. So in the lab, we kind of helped it. We figured out ways to blend voices together and so on and so forth. The technical components we solved, but it really wasn't until I gave my TED Talk in 2013 where I invited people from around the world to donate their voice to just to a stranger, to someone they don't know, and to speak about sort of opening your heart and really giving your voice to others. We honestly didn't think that more than a few hundred people would want to do this, because at that time we needed like lots of recordings, hours of recording. We thought we'd bring people into my lab and we would do these recordings and so on. And what happened is we had this incredible outpouring and generosity of people from around the world, literally around the world. Within months, we had thousands of volunteers, and we had no way of doing that in the lab. And so that's when I spun out the company VocaliD and really took it to that next level to say, if people are willing to donate their voice, we can really do this for more than the handful of people that we were making these synthetic voices for. And it was really a research project in the lab. By spinning it out, we made it a reality that others could actually benefit from it. That work, spearheaded VocaliD. Eventually, the technology, the underlying technology, ended up being acquired by Veritone. And now you're seeing lots of companies, generating synthetic voices and doing things like voice banking, which we also did for people who were losing their voice little by little to progressive neurological diseases, or even to something very, very sort of immediate, like head and neck cancer. So the idea of banking your voice is, I think, something that I would recommend all of your viewers to think about, because in today's AI world, our voice can be preserved. And it's not necessarily for these dire needs of like, what if you lose your voice? But there's so many interesting applications, including for personal connection, for thinking about people like, I have my parents' voices banked, because I would love to, someday maybe there's a way to retell their stories in their voice. It's such a meaningful kind of channel of communication, voice.
Absolutely. And that is so amazing and exceptional, like we take our voice for granted, most of us. And it's such an important part of who we really are. And
Yes.
when I was listening to your TED talk, you talk about this one moment, this one story, when you heard a 9-year-old girl and you hear the artificial synthetic voice that she was using. And so tell us a little bit about that genesis and what happened when you were at that conference, because I think that was sort of the aha breakthrough moment that led to everything that you did.
Essentially, we were I was at a conference, and I had just given a talk about the fact that people who cannot speak because of these neuromotor disorders still have preserved ability to make sound, and that sound is uniquely theirs. And what I saw was this young woman using her synthetic voice. It was actually like a grown adult man voice. And then in the same, within a couple of minutes, there's another gentleman using the same voice. And there's basically, you heard the same voice everywhere around you, because there was a practice, a clinical practice, where you would use adult male voices on everyone's devices at that time, because there were studies that were done in the late 70s, early 80s, showing that adult male voices were the easiest to understand in reverberant contexts. And so you heard a sea of the same voice. And I had just given this talk saying everyone has a unique voice. And so that kind of disconnect for me was like, why should this young woman be using the same voice as that grown man? Can't we do better than that? And if they all do have unique voices, how about we actually build this? But, that was 2002. I didn't really have the techniques or the understanding of how to do that. Many years later, we actually ended up getting a research grant in 2007, I think, and pursuing this work. So sometimes ideas incubate, that you can't act on them fully. But that spark, you have to feel and hear and let it sit for a while to know what to do with it.
Absolutely. And you were one of the pioneers. You said that this was over 20 years ago. We didn't even know about AI or natural language processing. When you and I met, the reason why I was so interested to get to know you is because I was interested in voice AI and how we develop biomarkers using voice as a biofeedback tool. But back
Yes.
then, absolutely had no knowledge, absolutely had no tools. But you being one of the visionaries and out of the box thinker was like, we can do better. A 9-year-old girl shouldn't sound like a 50-year-old man.
Yeah.
This is unique to her. This is unique to her personality. And how can we give her something that empowers her, that allows her to be more authentic, using tech for good, using tech for impact, using science for impact? And how did you decide to get into speech science back in the day, right? Because not many people think of that. And then, you were at MIT doing your postdoc. How did it all sort of come together as VocaliD?
I was good at math and science, and there's constant pressure to do that. And basically, I started undergrad thinking, what else am I going to do? Although I have to say, I had a very creative side to me, which was I liked building things. I sewed all my clothes in high school. I loved art. And I wanted to combine those things, but I feel like I didn't learn about speech language pathology until I was doing my neuroscience undergrad. And my brother-in-law, actually, who is a physician, introduced me to the profession. I followed and some speech pathologists and so on, and kind of learned what they did. I just was fascinated by the brain. I was fascinated by the brain. I went into speech pathology, but I still kind of had this nagging thing of like, well, do I want to be a speech pathologist or what do I want to do? And that's when I came across this new technology of speech recognition technology in one of my internships. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. So I had this outsized idea that I was going to, as a clinician, build a machine that was going to recognize people who couldn't speak clearly because their patterns were consistent, even though they were unclear. And so then I worked as a speech pathologist for a while. And then I decided to go back and get my PhD. And that's when I really started pursuing this idea of what's in the voice signal. And that's where a lot of my technical skills, started to become I developed sort of my PhD was in speech science. And so that's where this idea of bringing technology and bridging the understanding of speech production with technology kind of came to. And so it's sort of like a nonlinear path when you discover one thing and then that leads you to discovering something new. And I think VocaliD to me was this marriage of the creative side of like building something and the scientific side of really taking those ideas and bringing them forward. So it was really a fascinating journey. And now I'm like on this new path of like looking at the voice signal to understand what it can uncover about our health and what the sound of health is. And again, these are all related themes, but they come from what you know, but what you're curious about knowing more about.
You were somebody who tapped into both your head and your heart, and you tried to bring them together, which again, it's such an important skill. We tend to overanalyze and be analytical, especially us type A people, women especially, we tend to over masculinate ourselves on data, on science, on having a particular profession, but you believed in your creativity, in your feminine side. You allowed your heart to guide you. And you built a coherence between your head and heart to truly navigate that journey, which I'm sure had its twists and turns. That's why we entrepreneurs, we take the path less taken, but that's how you innovate. That's how you bring new technologies to market, you commercialize them, you build a business model around it. Tell us a little bit about, that entrepreneurial journey of being a woman, having to fundraise, going to VCs who maybe had no idea about why do you want to build synthetic voices? Like, what was that journey like for you and fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, my journey, particularly as a sole founder and academic with an academic background and, kind of in like peak of that career, essentially, it's like I wasn't like a 20-something trying to run this, to start this company. So there's already a bit of a bias in terms of, oh, you're a sole founder, you're a female founder, you're a scientist, there's all these little whammies. But there's, of course, also, there's this interest and curiosity because it was like this social good and so on. So at the beginning, there was, we had a lot of press, we had a lot of interest, and we did have a lot of conversations with VCs, but many times when you were selling a vision that was too early in some ways, because listen, the iPad, like so much of the technology wasn't even there. Amazon Echo was developed or was on the market in 2015, I think, or 16. We were formed in 2014. So like the thought of all these devices talking to you and they'll be using the same kind of voice, because the pain point of someone who can't speak and who has to use a generic voice wasn't really understood by the average individual, right? Because they probably never encountered these people or never even thought about why is it different. Oh my gosh, they have a device to talk, good enough, right? But they hadn't experienced it. And so when I was talking about the fact that each person deserves a unique voice of their own to be heard, it was kind of like, oh, that's great. And, I got a lot of comments initially about like, well, I don't need my GPS to sound like my wife. Like that's where the imagination stopped, right? And why would you ever want devices that have unique voices? What is this going to scale to? And when I would paint the bigger picture is that this is our beachhead. These people absolutely need a unique voice because they are unique individuals and with unique personalities. But we will have a day when think about your, like audiobooks. Think about so many devices that talk. Think about when you go to the parking garage, that super robotic voice that says, please insert the ticket to the right. Like that voice is like 1970 technology and we're okay with it. I mean, who cares? We don't care about that. But imagine a device where there's an aware home. There's things that are talking to you. There's so many applications where now we don't even have to imagine because they're here, right? Lots of things talk to us. And if everything talks to us in the same voice, you can't know who's talking and none of them have personality. And that vision was too far ahead at that point, And so I think we got lots of, what's it called? Chances at bat or whatever. I don't even know these baseball analogies, but we had a lot of conversations but many of them turned out to be bust because they, I think, believe in me that I, as a scientist, could also be an entrepreneur, that this idea was worthwhile pursuing because it's so niche. But I think the power of this is the story, our story, is that if you solve the biggest, most important problems, everything else is easy, right? And I do think we were too early. And that's part of what I think a scientist is. A scientist is a visionary. And I think part of our goal is to then take this out. And not every scientist is going to be an entrepreneur. I was at the right stage in my life, had the right context, and wanted to do it, right? And so I think a little more belief in people and not typecasting people as, oh, you can't do it. I mean, I got a lot of questions about the fact that I had young kids and how was I going to balance this, which is none of their business. But I don't think we give women enough benefit of the doubt like we give men. And if you tell a woman who is in her prime, who's had kids, she can't do something, you better watch out because she's going to do it and she's going to do it circles around that.
Absolutely. And more power to women like you, to women like us, because I share that same drive. And, every time I've been Asian, I have been going to VCs and to investors, we get asked the same question. Like, this is your first company, like you're an immigrant. Do you know what you're doing? And I know that it would be different than, if I were a guy, but who cares? I love being a woman, and I think it's about finding your own voice, believing in that voice. So was there a time in your journey, Rupal, when you had to search really deep, hard within yourself, to not let the naysayers kill your dream, kill your vision, kill your idea? And how did you find that voice? How did you reignite that passion and power and use it to ultimately convince people and build this successful company?
There's many times. I think we were mostly NSF, NIH, SBIR funded, and obviously revenue funded as well. We were a small company. We weren't, a massive company. There was many times where you're just like, am I the only believer? And of course, as an entrepreneur, and this, Simran, is that you're not just putting your heart and soul into it. You're putting your money into it, all of your credibility into it, your heart into it, and so every time things don't work out, it's not personal, but it aches. It aches in the deep of the core of who you are. And also, I think you also start thinking about things like, what am I, by continuing to pursue this so doggedly, what am I giving up in turn, right? Whether it be time with family, whether it be other opportunities or whatever. And so there was many times where there were these lows, and I had to question, can I be my only champion? Can I be the only person who really thinks that this is possible. And of course, you have a team that's invested into it, but you also have to support that team. You have to make sure that they can earn that paycheck. And so there's a lot of white hair, that you cover up with good hair color. But there's a lot of times where you have to like dig deep and find, why am I pursuing this? And I don't think it was, you always like look back and you kind of go, oh my gosh, it turned out so great, right? But there were sacrifices. There were real things that I had to give up as a result of kind of taking it here. And even when we were acquired, making sure that it was the right company, making sure that, everybody in the team was well taken care of. And then sometimes it's like, it's your baby, right? Like no one can do what you do or what you did for it, right? And so there's a slow letting go of what you've built and dissociating your identity with that, right? And so part of, what I want to do next is really tied to, I don't want to be known as just the VocaliD person or whatever, or that woman who gave that TED talk about that. There's more to me. There's more dimensions to me. And I learned so much from that experience. And one big thing I learned from the experience is I never want to do that alone. I never want to do that alone again, because that was lonely. It was stressful. It was less fun, to be honest. And which is why I love the journey that you and Ish are on, because I think that there's power in getting others who believe what you believe in and really building something together, bouncing ideas off of one another. That's when something really magical can happen.
Thank you for being on the journey with us. Thank you for advising us, for guiding us, for your mentorship. And I can completely understand, that how hard it can be as an entrepreneur with your blood, sweat, and tears. And I want to talk more about this next chapter post VocaliD. But also, one thing that I'd love to hear is, despite all the challenges and all the grind and the hustle, what did it feel like to you and your team when you created that first synthetic voice? And maybe talk about how you were blending. You were taking whatever was left in an individual's voice, and then you were blending it with somebody else to create that unique identity.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So our first year that we were in business in 2015, we did an Indiegogo campaign. And in that Indiegogo campaign, we promised to do 7 new voices by the end of 2015, in particular of a gentleman named John and his wife, Linda, who had lost his voice to ALS. And he did not really have he didn't have recordings of himself. And so we were blending a voice together. We hadn't really heard of what he sounded like before. We only knew him through his robotic voice, right? And when we delivered the voice, we were in our offices, and my colleague Jeff, who was the chief sort of engineer, he was the one who was doing all the blending at the time. So we were sitting around the conference table, and John and Linda come in, and we were presenting. At that point, we were creating sort of 3 different voices for people because we weren't sure how to blend and which samples to blend together and so on, and we were letting people choose which one. So we played him sample 1. And he sort of they kind of politely sort of smiled and kind of went, okay. And then you kind of see a little bit of the disappointment. And then voice 2 and then voice 3, all of a sudden his body starts to kind of shake. He looks over at Linda and he's just excited. And because of that excitement, he's just sort of physically moved by it. And she's crying and we're all crying. We're all just kind of, it was just such a magical moment because we were giving this man back his voice. He had had ALS. And so it was a long time since he'd been heard as himself. Right. And it was really so, I think it was powerful. It was deeply powerful. It was moving, but it wasn't perfect. There were still so many lessons to learn. There was so much, sometimes disappointment and sometimes hearing the harsh criticism of others who you were building this for. Still not happy. It's complicated in this issue where people are living with conditions where there's a lot of loss, right? And so there's a lot of feelings. There's mixed emotions in this. And so you have to kind of balance the technology excitement with the human side of what it means to be given a new voice. You think you have this amazing solution, but it may not be for everyone.
Yeah. And as entrepreneurs, that's what keeps us going, is those magic moments of ecstasy, of trance, of like, doing something that has never been done before. But then the grounding experiences of rejection, of failure, and just understanding that life is about contrast and about continuing to walk the path, continuing to find your purpose. I'm really curious to see what the next chapter for you holds now that you're back at Northeastern. But before we jump into that, you've been one of the pioneers in voice AI and kind of led the evolution of using voice as a biomarker, even when people were aware of it. And now everybody's using voice. We're talking to ChatGPT, to Gemini, we have a voice coach. We have so much technology that it's kind of hard to discern between what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
And why do you think now more than ever, it's really important for us to find that true, authentic voice and to almost bank our voice amidst all the technology, amidst all the artificial social media?
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, we're, in a society where the loudest voices are being heard, right? And I think a lot of that is about messaging and about getting those ideas out. But I think what we're talking about in terms of voice is sort of that inner voice, that unique voice, that authentic voice of who you are. And, part of it is functional, it allows us to communicate, but part of it is really a signature and a cue to how we are feeling and how we are, how is our body reacting to the world around us? And we know that people who are anxious, people who are depressed, people who have neurological conditions, for many, many reasons, even people with different kinds of heart conditions, these are all different kinds of health issues that can be detected in voice. In fact, voice is such a fine motor skill and a fine motor instrument, basically, that we've learned how to control, that is very, very sensitive. So it's very sensitive, but it's not very specific. So just because my pitch is high doesn't mean I'm excited, or just because I'm speaking softly doesn't mean, or slowly, doesn't mean I'm depressed. So I think understanding how our voice is giving off the internal state of our bodies is really important, but then to peel it apart from all the rest of who we are. So every individual is not just anxious or depressed or this or that, right? They're a culmination of different things, right? And so what we're looking for in this whole area of voice biomarkers is, what are the distinct signatures that are different? How can we pull them apart? Think about something even as simple, not simple, but something like, the transition during menopause. Women's biggest changes in their voice will happen during the perimenopausal, menopausal time period. Men have typically gone through the biggest changes in their voice during puberty, right? But these menopausal voice changes that happen in women's voices sometimes actually are similar to the same kinds of changes that happen because of neurological conditions, because of other mental health or physical health or physiological health conditions. And so trying to be able to uncover and detangle these different aspects of voice and what they are saying about our health is actually really important. So I think part of what's interesting is this almost renaissance of thinking about voice as this really important signal, but not over asserting that because voice is X, the voice is changed in this way, that one has this condition. It is, like I said, very sensitive, but not very specific. And so combining it with other signals, which is why I fell in love with what we're building at Tattva, is because breath and voice can be connected, because inner happiness and peace can be signaled through voice as well. And I think that there's very much, now we have the instrumentation. I mean, our cell phone can collect and help us collect voice. So voice is non-invasive, cheap, easily deployable. Also, the thing is, when we're talking, we take away the one barrier to entry for many technologies, which is text and literacy. Everyone can read at a level that is complex enough for many of the tasks that we ask people to do when we're talking about text. Voice is natural, it's conversational, it dissolves some of those barriers for global entry in terms of making this deployable over the world. So I think it's really a beautiful instrument that we're sort of just beginning to tap into now, which I think but I do caution against oversimplifying what is in the voice signal and thinking about it more broadly as a tool and not the tool.
Absolutely. You put it so beautifully that we are at a renaissance of what we can do with our voice.
Yes.
And one element is what you mentioned, the physiology, the biology of the body, and how our very important biomarker voice changes as we go through life, as we go through hormonal changes, how that shifts, what changes can we use to make health more predictive and preventative, but
Yeah.
also taking up it a notch and thinking about well-being, because in Tattva, we're thinking about health as preventive and as integrating well-being in your everyday life by
Yes.
using simple ways that we have access to, right? And then the other element is the more metaphorical and the more, philosophical element of voice, which is your identity,
Yeah.
your authenticity, and your expression. And voice is one of the ways that we communicate, we express our true selves. And what I've noticed that, we all have this identity growing up in India, being South Asian, having a certain upbringing. As women, we tend to lose ourselves. We tend to sort of lower that voice based on society's reaction to us. So for me, it's about discovering your true voice, your true expression, and using it as a way to grow, to transform, to live to your highest potential.
Yeah.
And, talking about what we are doing at Tattva, but kind of taking a back step. When we first met, Rupal, you were very, well versed with AI and voice, how we use that, but you weren't really thinking about breath work or meditation or things that we're sort of bringing together at Tattva. So what were some of your earlier thoughts on that, and what made you curious and intrigued to try it out?
Yeah, I had never tried breath work before. I'd also only once tried, I had recently, I think, tried soundscapes when I was in Sedona. And so I met you sort of at a time where it was right after that, I believe. And I think part of the last few years' journey for me has been a little bit of taking that leap of faith and thinking about what else is out there that we're not necessarily tuning into. I think this comes with a little bit with age, a little bit with sort of maturity to think about. And maybe people are awakened to this earlier in their lives as well. But I think the sense of like, there is something bigger than ourselves. There is, reflection and time for ourselves and different ways to tune into our bodies and our minds. There are so many practices like this. There are so many ancient practices that, yes, I didn't know them. I was maybe even a little bit skeptical, I would say, of what breath work is and how does it, I needed the scientific explanation to go from like, how does that relate, But once you experience something and once you kind of feel it, and if you allow yourself to be open to it, I think that's the big thing, is sometimes we have these barriers that I can't do. I don't think that this is going to work. I'll take that even for acupuncture, for example. When I was pregnant with my son, I had a lot of Braxton Hicks and, nothing worked. And I actually ended up doing acupuncture, which I hadn't done ever in my life, but I knew it felt different. I could feel it felt different. And there was a lot of naysayers like, how is that going to help or whatever. But I do think that this is maybe a little bit of the curiosity part of, entrepreneurship is like, entrepreneurs, I think, are generally curious people. And so I was curious, like, hey, if there's this woman named Simran that is doing this breath work and she sounds really interesting, says my friend Ramani. So then let me hear it and let me experience it. And I think having having experienced that with you, I think that was a first sort of like understanding of, this does feel different. You can tap into something. And I feel like every time I would do this now, I think I'll see something different because I think I was still processing. I wasn't letting my full mind be there. But I do believe in the fact that there are things we haven't necessarily explored in the Western world in terms of wellness and health that I think we're all becoming awoken to, right? And I think Eastern Western medicine has been at this, sort of competing. But I think if we blend them, we have a much better way of actually living our lives more healthily, And I totally believe I think wellness should be our number one sort of focus. Health has become all about sick care. If we defined health as wellness, we would be so much better off because we wouldn't get to the sick care,
Absolutely. And to your point, the Western medicine, which is very much addressing the symptoms of an issue, has neglected the ancient systems of healing, of yoga, of pranayama, which is about how do you use your life force, how do you use your everyday being to live healthily, but also to live joyfully at peace. And so with Tattva, we're trying to bring those together and saying, like, that's not woo-woo, we can bring an element of science, of rigor to these practices of conscious breathing, meditation. We can use sensors, incorporate biofeedback, give you a very personalized approach to your well-being. And we're not saying that tech should take over because we do this beautiful retreat in Costa Rica, we go immerse ourselves in nature, we step away from technology. But what tech does is that we want to give people a choice. We want to give people an on-demand tool to take control of their health and well-being.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone, like you mentioned, midlife, or especially women who are entering perimenopause or menopause? We enter this beautiful phase in life, very less talked about, where our hormones are shifting, our life is shifting. And as women, we always do stuff for others. We always prioritize ourselves and we put ourselves last. And I think that is sort of the inflection point when we start to think about, what about me? What's next? What's more for me? And we don't always, breath work and meditation sounds too spiritual sometimes. So what would you say to all these women and even, men that have partners when we think about breath work, meditation, and using some of these interventions and modalities for well-being and inner transformation?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing this up. And I think the period of menopause and perimenopause is A, so long. B, it's at a point in your life where there's so many things going on. You have to, be managing both your home and your life and all these transitions. And there's so many transitions. Of course, your career is at a certain height or whatever as well. I think it's kind of like that message that they say on the airplanes, put on your mask first before you help others. Because until you're well, you can't take care of anyone. And I think you can't be there fully for anyone. And I think we don't do that. I didn't do that. I mean, there was a point where a lot of the initial symptoms of menopause for me were like irritability, lack of sleep, a lot of that kind of not anxiety, but very short with just how I was dealing with things. And there was a lot of pressure. Initially, I just thought it's just because of the pressure. And then, I realized actually there was one time that I think I was just snapping. I was snapping at my kids and they were, kind of in middle school age level. And I remember my husband once saying to me, you have to get control of this. They're scared of you. I'm like, that's crazy. And I think that was the big kind of what? How can that be? And I think that was really sort of a realization that sometimes you just need help. You need to ask for it. I didn't, even during my academic career, as you're going through tenure and stuff, I didn't really have a close group of friends. I had locked myself into this career. And even when I was building my company, it was all about the work, the constant this. If I was home, it was about making meals and taking care of the kids or bringing them here or there or whatever, even though we had help as well. But I think that until you kind of realize, wow, I mean, there is a price to pay for trying to do it all without getting what you need. When my daughter started high school, I decided that I was consciously going to make some friends. And I luckily fell into this walking group of friends. And then that ended up being, there's a lot of people in the walking group, but then there was a smaller group of women who were South Asian, who had kids at the school, who like I ended up becoming friends with, and this sort of sisterhood that came of it. And that sort of, I think, helped me realize that there's other people that are going through similar things. It's good to talk about it. It's great to actually detach and make time for you, because the reason that we feel anxious and sort of stressed out in these periods is because everything is demanding of you and you never have time for you. So like even simple things like going and getting your nails done, I would put things off. There was a lot of self-care I was putting off, but that's also why I think being open to things like making exercise a priority. Like I have now been doing that, which I felt like I didn't need to do before. I was always relatively healthy and slim and so on. And then it catches up. Your metabolism slows down. You kind of have to actively do something about it. So I would just say to others in this position is that you can't do it alone. Why should you do it alone? Because it's boring without friends, without people. Talk about it because you're not the only one experiencing it. And make time for you because you're worth it. It's time to invest in you, just like you've invested in everyone else around you. Because if you don't, you can't be your full self. And they're going to continue to see that self of you, that side of you, that you probably don't want them to remember. You want them to remember all of who you are, not the parts of you trying to hold it all together desperately with everything pulling at you. And hopefully that's a good kind of visual for how I think we fray, and we need to have time to mend.
Beautiful. Yeah, we need to have time to mend, to take care of ourselves, to fill our own cup, to have well-being rituals, to find a group of friends, community that we can be our true selves with, and to immerse in nature, right? Like, I think that's when you're doing something
Yes.
fun in nature, in a group of like-minded individuals, that true magic happens. Going back to what you said around breath work and soundscapes and meditation, you said that when you first experienced, you were a little bit skeptical.
Yeah.
And I want to double click on how is it after that? Like, how was that skepticism changed, and how was your experience, and what did you sort of gain out of it? And for anyone considering more tools within their well-being, what experience or outcomes can you share from it?
So there is the immediate experience of just being like, I just went through something very different, something I've never experienced before. There is that immediate experience. Especially, I would say the sound part, the sound therapy, that you literally feel like you're being moved. And it was truly magical. I think there was just something really different, unique, experiential, that's sort of like the immediate response. The next day after our breathwork session, I think for me, is that I had like this feeling of having worked out in parts of my body that I know I hadn't worked out, like I hadn't lifted for or whatever. So again, the reaction of doing the breath work and how it felt on my body and how it left the imprint on my body of feeling actually open here, open up here. And I think that again, I guess maybe it's sort of like there's an analytical part of it works. And then there's also just the feeling of feeling happy and euphoric and feeling, like your smile is like hard to remove. So I don't know. I think you kind of have to experience it to understand it and also want it again. Right. And so like, if you experience something and you say, I'd like to try that again, I'd like to try more fully again or whatever. I think those are the baby steps it takes to kind of fully immerse into a new practice, similar with like yoga or Pilates or any kind of new experience that you want to start to become a practice.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that experience. I think that most people, they undermine something as simple as your breath, how powerful it can be.
Yes.
And 5,000-6,000 years ago, when there were no therapeutics in the market, the ancient mystics and the yogis and the shamans, they were using our own life force. They were resetting our own nervous system using breath to heal,
Yes.
but also to be more in control, to activate one's intuition, to find your purpose, right? Like more spiritual elements. And I think in the Western world, when yoga came, we sort of adopted the physical form of yoga, but the asanas. But we forgot the most foundational part of yoga, which is the breath and the pranayama. And so what you felt, you said it's like a workout. It absolutely is, because very consciously we are breathing into each and every cell in our body. We are hyper oxygenating it. We are changing the pH, flushing out toxins. So it's extremely healthful from a scientific perspective. And it's also releasing DMT. It's releasing DMT, it's shifting our nervous system for fight or flight into rest and digest. And not many of us do that. We're constantly living in the hustle culture. And that's why, as a pharmacist, I kind of fell in love with it. And I started thinking, why aren't we using simple techniques for everyday well being that we can prove by science, and amplifying it with sound? Since our cells are vibrating, we're creating a resonance to sort of reset our
Yeah.
whole body in a very easy, fun way. And we're both big believers in science and medicine, but we also want to address our root causes. We want to, go to the root, go to the foundation, and enable well-being every day. So
One of the other things I felt was this restful sleep after having that session. And I think that's really important as we think about like how important sleep is. There's a lot of work out there that just shows like sleep is important for just being alert and, for memory and all those kinds of things. But the chronic lack of sleep that we are getting in this society as we're kind of getting poor sleep or not good sleep, that has implications for our brain health long term. And so I think if we want to continue to live happy, healthy, full lives, understanding how we can slow our bodies down and actually have good, restful sleeps that give us the potential to be 100% of who we are every single day. This is critical, I think, to brain health and physical well-being as anything. So I think the importance of like helping slow that body and like slow your mind, I think is just really important. So I also noted that like that was one of the best sleeps I had. And it was also, it just was really, I felt rested in the morning. And that's actually a really important feeling. That's not always the case, right? When we're dealing with all these other life balance, like things that are kind of encroaching on our lives. And so it's important to carve out that special time, those 8 hours, so that they're the best that they can be, as opposed to, just saying we slept.
absolutely. No, that's incredible. I'm glad that you had a restful night of sleep. And I think there's sleep and then quality of sleep and deep rest. And so
Yes.
when we're doing sound baths and we're doing conscious breathing, it actually is a deep rest. And that we measured brain waves
Yes.
during that session. And what we find is that you go from high beta, which is active thinking, which is anxiety and stress, into alpha, but then also lower brain waves of delta and theta, which are the same brain waves that we achieve during sleep. So it's a deep rest period, and it enables your mind to kind of slow down. The reason why a lot of us are not getting deep sleep is like we're constantly thinking, we're worrying, we're anxious, we're thinking about the past, worrying about the future, right? And
Yeah.
so doing such interventions and modalities, we're kind of resetting that system, that operating system within us, to saying like, just calm down, you're safe. There's no saber-toothed tiger, and allowing ourselves to enter those phases of deep rest.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this understanding, I think, with others, and like just the energy and the enthusiasm with which you're kind of bringing these ancient practices back is just so, it's really exciting, and it's really refreshing.
We're bringing science to soul, to spirituality in a way that not many companies are thinking about. But more than that, I think what's unique is that we have community. We have community and nature at the center of what we're building. We're bringing like minded people together. We're bringing exceptional women and men who believe in well being, who believe in impact. And I think that's what excites me the most.
Yes, me too. I think the aspect of nature, I was recently in Bhutan and like just moved by the beauty of this place. And I think that nature has a way, there's something called like forest bathing, where you kind of go into the forest and in nature and kind of like are there experiencing what it just means like to be you and be human in this world, right? Which is beside all this chaos that we have. It's really fascinating how our bodies can adjust to it, or not adjust to all this chaos that we have. And then when we experience that, like being in nature, it only takes a few minutes. I mean, one of my favorite activities is to go on a walk with a friend out in nature because it's just so energizing, you know? It's so energizing.
So simple and so beautiful. And, I may add, you can, the next time you go out with a friend, I also invite you to walk barefoot on grass and ground yourself, That's a really good way to kind of connect with your feet, with the earth, and be more grounded. And that's one of the activities like forest bathing, sound bath, that I'm very excited to take individuals to Costa Rica and have them experience that. Because to your point, we've just forgotten these very simple things that make us feel amazing and good, and help us to connect with something bigger and larger than ourselves, and not be scattered, not be in the hustle chaos culture.
Yes, absolutely. That sounds beautiful. I will try that. See, this is why I'm so excited about being on this journey with you, Anish, is because I'm going to learn so much. It's like I have one piece of something that I can help with, but I am going to learn so much from what you're building and what we're building together, and it's just so exciting.
Thank you. No, I think we're grateful to be co-creating with you and, everyone else who's going to be on this journey with us. So thank you again, Rupal. Such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights, and looking forward to many more intriguing conversations and what we built together at the.
Absolutely. Thanks, Simran, for having me on.